Hey guys, Coach Pop here. Thanks for joining me for this week's video lecture. Today we're looking at Strayer's Chapter 6, Commonalities and Variations in Africa and the Americas. And while so far in the unit we have looked exclusively at civilizations in Eurasia, in this chapter several important second wave civilizations outside of Eurasia are discussed. Many of them, especially in the Americas, continue to influence the cultures and societies of today. Moreover, those peoples who developed alternatives to civilizations have made contributions that deserve a place in the account of human history. In the first section, there are some basic similarities and differences when comparing African and American societies to those of Asia that are discussed. The various and almost simultaneous revolutions in agricultural production were central to the formation of complex societies around the world. This was a truly revolutionary transformation of human life, and it happened in Africa and the Americas as well as Eurasia. While the agricultural revolution was a fundamental change in the history of humanity and the planet, the uneven distribution of human communities and animals suitable for domestication were skewed towards Eurasia, and this has led world historians to pay less attention to Africa and the Americas. The less developed use of metal and writing systems has also led to a greater emphasis on Eurasia at the expense of pre-Columbian America and sub-Saharan Africa. There is an important distinction between the fact that the Americas were geographically isolated from the prehistorical migrations across an ice bridge until the Iberian voyages of discovery, and Africa, which had centuries of contact with Eurasia via trans-Saharan and Swahili coast merchants. Sub-Saharan Africa had no common cultural identity in the pre-modern era. Indeed, its geographical and environmental diversity is mirrored in its many different cultures. Moreover, because it is the most tropical of the supercontinents, Africa has less productive soil but more disease-carrying insects. Even so, several important civilizations did develop in Africa in the classical era. The Nile provided a sustained connection between Egypt and Nubia to the south for thousands of years. There's clear evidence of both cultures influencing each other. There were military campaigns between the two civilizations, with Nubia conquering Egypt at one point. As the influence of Egypt waned, the city of Meroe rose as a center of the Nubian state system, with an all-powerful monarch heading the empire. There were at least 10 cases of queens ruling or co-ruling Meroe. The state was not as centralized as Egypt because of geographical differences. While the Nile provided water for agriculture, there was also sufficient rainfall in the region. This meant that there was less of a demand for irrigation, which also meant that the state did not have to be as centralized. Rainfall also allowed for a much more geographically spread out society than the Egyptians, who were so closely clustered to the Nile. The region benefited from its location as a key hub of trade, either along the Nile to the north or east and west via camel caravans. From the 300s to roughly 1300 of the Common Era, the Coptic branch of Christianity dominated the civilization, using Greek as a language for worship and constructing churches in the Coptic or Byzantine style. Only after 1300, as the state weakened and Arabs immigrated into the region, did the area become part of the greater Islamic world. By about 50 of the Common Era, a substantial state arose south of Meroe. Axum would eventually exert a loose control over neighboring peoples, mostly through the collection of tribute. Centered in the Horn of Africa, this region enjoyed unique conditions in Africa that were favorable to plowing as opposed to using a digging stick as they did elsewhere. This allowed people to grow a large supply of grain crops. Its location also made it an excellent center for maritime trade in the Indian Ocean and Red Sea as an exporter of products from the interior of Africa. Taxes on this trade made Axum a very wealthy state. The capital city contained impressive architecture, including huge stone obelisks as high as 100 feet. The official state language was known as Ge'ez, and it was written in a script that was derived from the South Arabic writing system. The Romans recognized Axum as a powerful empire along with their own and the Persian empires. Trade routes to the north introduced Christianity to the kingdom about the same time as the Roman Emperor Constantine converted Despite the spread of Islam in the region, the mountains of Ethiopia remained predominantly Christian. Today, the area is about 60% Christian. As the desert lands of the Sahara began to spread during the Classical era, people began to move southwards into the Sahel, a grassland area just south of the Sahara. Soon they would move even more southwards to settle near the Niger River. Over the course of some 5 centuries, these waves of migrants formed numerous cities. They brought various trades and herding practices with them. They did not develop state systems of either the imperial type or local city-state variety. Because the political organization of these cities resembled chiefdoms in agricultural societies, there was little political hierarchy. However, social stratification did develop around skilled crafts, with ironworking being the most important and highest on the social ladder. As the cities often lacked various raw materials and commodities, increasingly long trade networks developed, linking the various cities with producers of minerals, agricultural goods, and other commodities. This will become the basis of the trans-Saharan trade routes we will examine later. This map is from your textbook that shows several things. First of all, here's where Nubia was originally. You can see Meroe is at the edge of their lands. Axum is over here. This is the area that will be settled by the Bantu people. Note as well over here the Niger River cities that are sort of like at the bottom of these trade routes that go across the Sahara that link them with the Mediterranean area. Before the Common Era, a widespread culture began to develop in Central America that was heavily influenced by the Olmecs from the Foundations era. In the area of the Yucatan Peninsula, a few cities arose after about 1000 BCE, but the real flourishing of Mayan culture was between 250 and 900 of the Common Era. The Maya had numerous cities with populations in the tens of thousands and impressive architecture such as massive pyramids. They developed sophisticated mathematics and recorded careful observations of the stars, planets, moon, and sun, allowing them to predict eclipses and other natural phenomena. The Maya also had the most developed writing system in the Americas. Their wealth stemmed from very productive agriculture, whose bounty came from very carefully and extensively reshaped landscapes with terraces, irrigation systems, and leveled tops. Their politics were not imperial as in Rome, Persia, or China, but organized by competing city-states as in Greece. Due to a collection of factors, including overpopulation, the outstripping of resources, prolonged drought, and warfare, the Maya saw a rapid and catastrophic collapse of their civilization. It is worth remembering, though, that even as the civilization collapsed, the Maya people continued to survive. Further west, a huge city north of the Valley of Mexico may have begun as early as 150 BCE. It reached its height around 550 of the Common Era before suddenly and mysteriously collapsing in 650 CE. Teotihuacan seems to have been planned from the time of its construction rather than developing organically and haphazardly over time. The scale and sophistication of the architecture was extremely impressive. At its height, it had nearly 200,000 people, making it the 6th largest city in the world. It directly administered an area of about 10,000 square miles and controlled a vital area in a trade network that extended from the Anasazi to the Maya. Here's a map of Mesoamerica from your textbook. These are the areas that we call the Mayan civilization. Notice the many different city-states here. Teotihuacan is here. This is the area that they control. And then, as you can see, they send out military and trade expeditions both north and south from there. The central Peruvian coast has been the home to many states and societies, dating back to the Norte Chico. Its rich marine environment provided endless supplies of fish and birds, animals not domesticated but still used to feed the many civilizations that rose and fell between 1000 BCE and 1000 CE. Between 2000 and 1000 BCE, a number of ritual sites and temple complexes developed in the Andes. By 900 BCE, the city of Chavin de Huantar became a focal point for an early civilization. Note that the College Board considers this the first civilization in the Andes of the Foundation era. Chavin de Huantar had a population of 2,000 to 3,000 people by 750 BCE with a distinct social hierarchy. The elite lived in stone homes while commoners had adobe homes. They built an elaborate and complex temple at this site. Artwork shows that the temple complex had connections to all directions in the high and lowlands. Many animals from the lowlands were represented as gods and sacred figures. During the Classical era, a civilization arose along 250 miles of Pacific coast between 100 and 800 of the Common Era. The population of the Moche concentrated around the small river valleys that formed from the Andean highlands. The abundant sardines and other fish of this part of the Pacific provided a great source of food, and the rivers fed irrigation systems in what would otherwise be dry and barren lands. Guano, or bat dung, from the coastal inlands was used as fertilizer. Religious and military elites were very wealthy and presided over human sacrifices. Graves of elites from the period show much material wealth. The metal workers, potters, and weavers also left artifacts showing sophisticated skills. The region is prone to earthquakes, droughts, and floods, and there was some sort of ecological crisis in the 5th century. By the 8th century, the Moche civilization had collapsed. Between 400 and 1000 of the Common Era, two larger civilizations developed out of ancient settlements, one in the north and the other in the south. Both had large capitals with impressive monumental buildings. These states did not control continuous bands of territory. Rather, the capital city set up colonies in the western and eastern lowlands, giving them access to distinctly different ecological zones. The two civilizations developed different agricultural styles and state systems, but there was little conflict along their 300-mile shared border. They shared related cultural and religious systems, but spoke distinct languages. While these states collapsed and broke into smaller kingdoms, the Inca would use their state system, highways, and styles of dress and art when they rose to power in the following centuries of the post-classical era. This map is from your textbook. Here you can see the Chavin. Remember, this is really from the Foundations era. The Moche will basically take that over after the Chavin fall. These are the two kingdoms, Wari and Tiwanaku. Note that they extend from the highlands, here's the mountains right here, both west and east into the lowland areas. In both Africa and the Americas, societies developed that were not necessarily civilizations, but that nonetheless have had enormous historical impact. One of these is the result of the migrations of the Bantu peoples. Over many centuries, a slow migration of Bantu people out of present-day Nigeria and Cameroon spread a common language base, cultural patterns, farming, and ironworking technology. As land was plentiful and population was small, there was little need for large state systems. The Bantu overwhelmed existing gatherer-hunter societies with their demographic superiority thanks to farming, their introduction of new diseases such as malaria, and the use of iron tools and weapons. The Batwa, or Pygmy people of Central Africa, adapted to the arrival of the Bantus by becoming forest specialists who traded products from the jungle for Bantu goods, even as they adopted Bantu languages for themselves. In East Africa, the Bantus' yams did not grow well, so they began to farm crops introduced from Southeast Asia, such as coconuts, sugar cane, and bananas. As the Bantu migrations covered a large area over many centuries, in the millennium between 500 and 1500 of the Common Era, a wide variety of societies, beliefs, and rituals developed. It is a safe generalization to say that Bantu gender codes were less patriarchal than in other societies around the world. gender parallelism, which is another form of separate but equal, rather than a strict hierarchy, was the main practice. The various religious traditions did not focus on the role of a creator god, but rather on the impact of spirits of ancestors and spirits of the natural world. The Bantu did not develop a universal religious tradition with a single historic revelation, but rather believed in constant communication with the spiritual world. These faiths were localized to specific geographical areas and communities. Another alternative to civilization appears in North America, where many of the peoples lived a semi-sedentary lifeway that included agriculture, but maintained hunting and gathering. Mesoamerica introduced maize to the southwestern portion of North America. Due to the harsh desert climate, though, it took several centuries for a maize-based agricultural society to develop enough to support larger populations. Because maize was not easy to grow in the desert, early Anasazi dwellings were smaller pit houses dug into the ground with a buffalo hide for shelter. Kivas, or ceremonial pits, were used for rituals and demonstrated the belief that humans came from the ground. As maize was adapted to its new environment, populations grew and larger settlements formed. These above-ground structures were known as pueblos. Around Chaco Canyon, 5 pueblos formed and established a road system that may have been more symbolic or religious than practical, since they did not have the wheel or draft animals like horses. Chaco was a center for turquoise production, which provided a valuable commodity in a trade route that extended into Mesoamerica. There were a variety of sophisticated cultural achievements in art and astronomy before an extended drought contributed to the Pueblo collapse. The eastern woodlands of North America, especially around the Mississippi River Valley, developed agriculture based on squash and pumpkins independently. Once maize and beans were introduced indirectly from Mesoamerica, the Three Sisters style of agriculture would supplement hunting and gathering food. Archaeologists have discovered massive earthworks that indicate a high level of social organization and wealth, as well as mathematical and astronomical sophistication. The culture is called Hopewell after the name of an early archaeological site. Near present-day St. Louis, Missouri, Cahokia was a settlement that became the dominant center of the region. There was a massive terraced pyramid, a population of at least 10,000 people surrounding the complex, and evidence of long-distance trade networks. While there was trade, social stratification, large population centers, and even extensive military capacities, the linguistic divisions of the region did not allow the same cultural unity that characterized the Bantu world. Here's the map from your book. Again, we've got the Anasazi, or remember that Strayer uses the word or the phrase ancestral pueblo out here in the southwest. You can see this huge, large area of these mound-building peoples extending all, even extremely to the headlands of the Mississippi River. Here is where the site called Hopewell was discovered, which would later become used as a name for the culture. In the reflection section, Strayer is raising some questions about how we put everything into world history. First of all, he asks what gets included and what gets left out. How are you going to decide what to cut? You can't put everything in. One way to try to decide that is the length, size, and impact of a culture. You can use that as arguments for including somebody or excluding somebody else. We also have to recognize that where the historian and the audience live matters. For example, if you live in Ethiopia, you're probably going to have a world history curriculum that puts Ethiopia and then Africa at the center and then moves out from there. That's just sort of common sense. Wherever you are, that's sort of where you start in terms of how you're going to tell the story. The last point there, though, is that historians have yet to end these debates or accept one set of clear and firm answers to these questions. And indeed, these are questions that I hope you will be asking yourself as we continue throughout the course. That's it for Chapter 6. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you in class.